Chapter 18. Old Tabret talked, but he acted also. Abandoned by the investigating magistrate to his own resources, he set to work without losing a minute and without taking a moment's rest. The story of the cabriolet, drawn by a swift horse, was exact in every particular. Lavish with his money, the old fellow had gathered together a dozen detectives on leave or rogues out of work. And at the head of these worthy assistants, seconded by his friend Lecoq, he had gone to Bougival. He had actually searched the country, house by house, with the obstinacy and the patience of a maniac hunting for a needle in a haystack. His efforts were not absolutely wasted. After 3 days' investigation, he felt comparatively certain that the assassin had not left the train at Rouen, as all the people of Bougival, La Jonchère, and Marly do, but had gone on as far as Chatou. Tabret thought he recognized him in a man described to him by the porters at that station as rather young, dark, and with black whiskers, carrying an overcoat and an umbrella. This person, who arrived by the train which left Paris for Saint-Germain at 35 minutes past 8 in the evening, had appeared to be in a very great hurry. On quitting the station, he had started off at a rapid pace on the road which led to Bougival. Upon the way, 2 men from Marly and a woman from La Malmaison had noticed him on account of his rapid pace. He smoked as he hurried along. On crossing the bridge which joins the 2 banks of the Seine at Bougival, he had been still more noticed. It is usual to pay a toll on crossing this bridge. And the supposed assassin had apparently forgotten this circumstance. He passed without paying, keeping up his rapid pace, pressing his elbows to his side, husbanding his breath, and the gatekeeper was obliged to run after him for his toll. He seemed greatly annoyed at the circumstance, threw the man a 10-sou piece, and hurried on, without waiting for the 9-sou change. Nor was that all. The station master at Rouen remembered that, 2 minutes before the 10:15 train came up, a passenger arrived very agitated, and so out of breath that he could scarcely ask for a second-class ticket for Paris. The appearance of this man corresponded exactly with the description given of him by the porters at Chatou, and by the gatekeeper at the bridge. Finally, the old man thought he was on the track of someone who entered the same carriage as the breathless passenger. He had been told of a baker living at Asnières, and he had written to him, asking him to call at his house. Such was old Tabret's information, when on the Monday morning he called at the Palais de Justice, in order to find out if the record of Widow Lerouge's past life had been received. He found that nothing had arrived, but in the passage he met Gevrol and his man. The chief of detectives was triumphant, and showed it too. As soon as he saw Tabret, he called out, "Well, my illustrious mare's nest hunter, what news? Have you had any more scoundrels guillotined since the other day? Ah, you old rogue, you want to oust me from my place, I can see." The old man was sadly changed. The consciousness of his mistake made him humble and meek. These pleasantries, which a few days before would have made him angry, now did not touch him. Instead of retaliating, he bowed his head in such a penitent manner that Gevrol was astonished. "Jeer at me, my good Gevrol," he replied, "mock me without pity, you are right, I deserve it all." "Ah, come now," said the chief, "have you then performed some new masterpiece, you impetuous old fellow?" Old Tabret shook his head sadly. "I have delivered up an innocent man," he said, "and justice will not restore him his freedom." Gevrol was delighted, and rubbed his hands until he almost wore away the skin. "This is fine," he sang out, "this is capital. To bring criminals to justice is of no account at all. But to free the innocent, by Jove! That is the last touch of art. Tirauclair, you are an immense wonder, and I bow before you." And at the same time, he raised his hat ironically. "Don't crush me," replied the old fellow. "As you know, in spite of my grey hairs, I am young in the profession. Because chance served me 3 or 4 times, I became foolishly proud. I have learned too late that I am not all that I had thought myself, I am but an apprentice, and success has turned my head, while you, Gevrol, you are the master of all of us. Instead of laughing, pray help me, aid me with your advice and your experience. Alone, I can do nothing, while with your assistance. Gevrol is vain in the highest degree. Tabret's submission tickled his pretensions as a detective immensely, for in reality he thought the old man very clever. He was softened. I suppose, he said patronizingly, you refer to the Lecoq affair? Alas! Yes, my dear M. Gevrol, I wish to work without you, and I have got myself into a pretty mess. Cunning old Tabret kept his countenance as penitent as that of a sacristan caught eating meat on a Friday, but he was inwardly laughing and rejoicing all the while. Conceited fool! He thought, I will flatter you so much that you will end by doing everything I want. M. Gevrol rubbed his nose, put out his lower lip, and said, ah, hem. He pretended to hesitate. But it was only because he enjoyed prolonging the old amateur's discomfiture. Come, said he at last, cheer up, old Tirauclair. I'm a good fellow at heart, and I'll give you a lift. That's kind, isn't it? But, today, I'm too busy, I've an appointment to keep. Come to me tomorrow morning, and we'll talk it over. But before we part I'll give you a light to find your way with. Do you know who that witness is that I've brought? No, but tell me, my good M. Gevrol. Well, that fellow on the bench there, who is waiting for M. Daburon, is the husband of the victim of the Lecoq tragedy. Is it possible? Exclaimed old Tabret, perfectly astounded. Then, after reflecting a moment, he added, you are joking with me. No, upon my word. Go and ask him his name, he will tell you that it is Pierre Lerouge. She wasn't a widow then? It appears not, replied Gevrol sarcastically, since there is her happy spouse. Phew, muttered the old fellow. And does he know anything? In a few sentences, the chief of detectives related to his amateur colleague the story that Lerouge was about to tell the investigating magistrate. What do you say to that? He asked when he came to the end. What do I say to that? Stammered old Tabret, whose countenance indicated intense astonishment. What do I say to that? I don't say anything. But I think, no, I don't think anything either. A slight surprise, said Gevrol, beaming. Say rather an immense one, replied Tabret. But suddenly he started, and gave his forehead a hard blow with his fist. And my baker, he cried, I will see you tomorrow, then, M. Gevrol. He is crazed, thought the head detective. The old fellow was sane enough, but he had suddenly recollected the Asnières baker, whom he had asked to call at his house. Would he still find him there? Going down the stairs he met M. Daburon. But, as one has already seen, he hardly deigned to reply to him. He was soon outside, and trotted off along the quays. Now, said he to himself, let us consider. Noël is once more plain Noël Gerdy. He won't feel very pleased, for he thought so much of having a great name. Pshaw! If he likes, I'll adopt him. Tabret doesn't sound so well as Commarin, but it's at least a name. Anyhow, Gevrol's story in no way affects Albert's situation nor my convictions. He is the legitimate son, so much the better for him. That, however, would not prove his innocence to me, if I doubted it. He evidently knew nothing of these surprising circumstances, any more than his father. He must have believed as well as the Count in the substitution having taken place. Madame Gerdy, too, must have been ignorant of these facts. They probably invented some story to explain the scar. Yes, but Madame Gerdy certainly knew that Noël was really her son, for when he was returned to her, she no doubt looked for the mark she had made on him. Then, when Noël discovered the Count's letters, she must have hastened to explain to him. Old Tabret stopped as suddenly as if further progress were obstructed by some dangerous reptile. He was terrified at the conclusion he had reached. Noël, then, must have assassinated widow Lerouge, to prevent her confessing that the substitution had never taken place, and have burnt the letters and papers which proved it. But he repelled this supposition with horror, as every honest man drives away a detestable thought which by accident enters his mind. "What an old idiot I am," he exclaimed, resuming his walk. "This is the result of the horrible profession I once gloried in following. Suspect Noel, my boy, my sole heir, the personification of virtue and honor. Noel, whom 10 years of constant intercourse have taught me to esteem and admire to such a degree that I would speak for him as I would for myself. Men of his class must indeed be moved by terrible passions to cause them to shed blood, and I have always known Noel to have but 2 passions, his mother and his profession. And I dare even to breath a suspicion against this noble soul? I ought to be whipped. Old fool! Isn't the lesson you have already received sufficiently terrible? Will you never be more cautious?" Thus he reasoned, trying to dismiss his disquieting thoughts, and restraining his habits of investigation, but in his heart a tormenting voice constantly whispered, "Suppose it is Noel." He at length reached the Rue Saint-Lazare. Before the door of his house stood a magnificent horse harnessed to an elegant blue brougham. At the sight of these he stopped. A handsome animal. He said to himself, "My tenants receive some swell people." They apparently received visitors of an opposite class also, for, at that moment, he saw M. Clerget came out, worthy M. Clerget, whose presence in a house betrayed ruin just as surely as the presence of the undertakers announce a death. The old detective, who knew everybody, was well acquainted with the worthy banker. He had even done business with him once, when collecting books. He stopped him and said, "Hello. You old crocodile, you have clients, then, in my house?" "So it seems," replied Clerget dryly, for he does not like being treated with such familiarity. "Ah! Ah!" said old Tabret. And, prompted by the very natural curiosity of a landlord who is bound to be very careful about the financial condition of his tenants, he added, "Who the deuce are you ruining now?" "I am ruining no one," replied M. Clerget, with an air of offended dignity. "Have you ever had reason to complain of me whenever we have done business together? I think not. Mention me to the young barrister up there, if you like, he will tell you whether he has reason to regret knowing me." These words produced a painful impression on Tabret. What, Noel, the prudent Noel, one of Clerget's customers? What did it mean? Perhaps there was no harm in it, but then he remembered the 15,000 francs he had lent Noel on the Thursday. "Yes," said he, wishing to obtain some more information, "I know that Gerdy spends a pretty round sum. Clerget has the delicacy never to leave his clients undefended when attacked. It isn't he personally," he objected, "who makes the money dance, it's that charming little woman of his. Ah, she's no bigger than your thumb, but she'd eat the devil, hoofs, horns, and all." What? Noel had a mistress, a woman whom Clerget himself, the friend of such creatures, considered expensive. The revelation, at such a moment, pierced the old man's heart. But he dissembled. A gesture, a look, might awaken the usurer's mistrust, and close his mouth. "That's well known," replied Tabret in a careless tone. "Youth must have its day. But what do you suppose the wench costs him a year?" "Oh, I don't know. He made the mistake of not fixing a price with her. According to my calculation, she must have, during the 4 years that she has been under his protection, cost him close upon 500,000 francs. 4 years? 500,000 francs. These words, these figures, burst like bombshells on old Tabret's brain. 500,000. In that case, Noel was utterly ruined. "But then, it is a great deal," said he, succeeding by desperate efforts in hiding his emotion, "it is enormous. Gerdy, however, has resources." "He," interrupted the usurer, shrugging his shoulders. "Not even that," he added, snapping his fingers, "he is utterly cleaned out. But, if he owes you money, do not be anxious. He is a sly dog. He is going to be married, and I have just renewed bills of his for 26,000 francs. Goodbye, Tabret." The usurer hurried away, leaving the poor old fellow standing like a milestone in the middle of the pavement. He experienced something of that terrible grief which breaks a father's heart when he begins to realize that his dearly loved son is perhaps the worst of scoundrels. And, yet, such was his confidence in Noel that he again struggled with his reason to resist the suspicions which tormented him. Perhaps the usurer had been slandering his friend. People who lend their money at more than 10% are capable of anything. Evidently he had exaggerated the extent of Noel's follies. And, supposing it were true? Have not many men done just such insane things for women, without ceasing to be honest? As he was about to enter his house, a whirlwind of silk, lace, and velvet stopped the way. A pretty young brunette came out and jumped as lightly as a bird into the blue brougham. Old Tabret was a gallant man, and the young woman was most charming, but he never even looked at her. He passed in, and found his concierge standing, cap in hand, and tenderly examining a 20-franc piece. "Ah, sir," said the man, "such a pretty young person, and so ladylike. If you had only been here 5 minutes sooner." "What lady?" "Why, that elegant lady, who just went out, sir. She came to make some inquiries about Gerdy. She gave me 20 francs for answering her questions. It seems that the gentleman is going to be married, and she was evidently much annoyed about it. Superb creature. I have an idea that she is his mistress. I know now why he goes out every night." Gerdy? "Yes, sir, but I never mentioned it to you, because he seemed to wish to hide it. He never asks me to open the door for him, no, not he. He slips out by the little stable door. I have often said to myself, perhaps he doesn't want to disturb me. It is very thoughtful on his part, and he seems to enjoy it so." The concierge spoke with his eyes fixed on the gold piece. When he raised his head to examine the countenance of his lord and master, old Tabret had disappeared. "There's another," said the concierge to himself. "I'll bet 100 sous, that he's running after the superb creature. Run ahead, go it, old dotard, you shall have a little bit, but not much, for it's very expensive." The concierge was right. Old Tabret was running after the lady in the blue brougham. "She will tell me all," he thought, and with a bound he was in the street. He reached it just in time to see the blue brougham turn the corner of the Rue Saint-Lazare. "Heavens," he murmured. "I shall lose sight of her, and yet she can tell me the truth." He was in one of those states of nervous excitement which engender prodigies. He ran to the end of the Rue Saint-Lazare as rapidly as if he had been a young man of 20. Joy! He saw the blue brougham a short distance from him in the Rue du Havre, stopped in the midst of a block of carriages. "I have her," said he to himself. He looked all about him, but there was not an empty cab to be seen. Gladly would he have cried, like Richard III, "My kingdom for a cab." The brougham got out of the entanglement, and started off rapidly towards the Rue Tronchet. The old fellow followed. He kept his ground. The brougham gained but little upon him. While running in the middle of the street, at the same time looking out for a cab, he kept saying to himself, "Hurry on, old fellow, hurry on. When one has no brains, one must use one's legs. Why didn't you think to get this woman's address from Clerget? You must hurry yourself, my old friend, you must hurry yourself. When one goes in for being a detective, one should be fit for the profession, and have the shanks of a deer." But he was losing ground, plainly losing ground. He was only halfway down the Rue Tronchet, and quite tired out. He felt that his legs could not carry him 100 steps farther, and the brougham had almost reached the Madeleine. At last an open cab, going in the same direction as himself, passed by. He made a sign, more despairing than any drowning man ever made. The sign was seen. He made a supreme effort, and with a bound jumped into the vehicle without touching the step. "There," he gasped, "that blue brougham, 20 francs. "All right," replied the coachman, nodding. And he covered his ill-conditioned horse with vigorous blows, muttering, a jealous husband following his wife, that's evident. G up. As for old Tabret, he was a long time recovering himself, his strength was almost exhausted. For more than a minute, he could not catch his breath. They were soon on the boulevards. He stood up in the cab leaning against the driver's seat. "I don't see the brougham anywhere," he said. "Oh, I see it all right, sir. But it is drawn by a splendid horse. Yours ought to be a better one. I said 20 francs, I'll make it 40. The driver whipped up his horse most mercilessly, and growled, "It's no use, I must catch her. For 20 francs, I would have let her escape, for I love the girls, and am on their side. But, fancy! 40 francs. I wonder how such an ugly man can be so jealous." Old Tabret tried in every way to occupy his mind with other matters. He did not wish to reflect before seeing the woman, speaking with her, and carefully questioning her. He was sure that by one word she would either condemn or save her lover. What? Condemn Noel? Ah, well. Yes. The idea that Noel was the assassin harassed and tormented him, and buzzed in his brain, like the moth which flies again and again against the window where it sees a light. As they passed the Chaussée d'Antin, the brougham was scarcely 30 paces in advance. The cab driver turned, and said, "But the brougham is stopping." "Then stop also. Don't lose sight of it. But be ready to follow it again as soon as it goes off." Old Tabret leaned as far as he could out of the cab. The young woman alighted, crossed the pavement, and entered a shop where cashmeres and laces were sold. "There," thought the old fellow, "is where the 1,000-franc notes go. 500,000 in 4 years. What can these creatures do with the money so lavishly bestowed upon them? Do they eat it? On the altar of what caprices do they squander these fortunes? They must have the devil's own potions which they give to drink to the idiots who ruin themselves for them. They must possess some peculiar art of preparing and spicing pleasure. Since, once they get hold of a man, he sacrifices everything before forsaking them." The cab moved on once more, but soon stopped again. The brougham had made a fresh pause, this time in front of a curiosity shop. "The woman wants then to buy out half of Paris," said old Tabret to himself in a passion. "Yes, if Noel committed the crime, it was she who forced him to it. These are my 15,000 francs that she is frittering away now. How long will they last her? It must have been for money, then, that Noel murdered widow Lerouge. If so, he is the lowest, the most infamous of men. What a monster of dissimulation and hypocrisy! And to think that he would be my heir, if I should die here of rage. For it is written in my will in so many words, I bequeath to my son, Noel Gerdy. If he is guilty, there isn't a punishment sufficiently severe for him. But is this woman never going home?" The woman was in no hurry. The weather was charming, her dress irresistible, and she intended showing herself off. She visited 3 or 4 more shops, and at last stopped at a confectioner's, where she remained for more than a quarter of an hour. The old fellow, devoured by anxiety, moved about and stamped in his cab. It was torture thus to be kept from the key to a terrible enigma by the caprice of a worthless hussy. He was dying to rush after her, to seize her by the arm, and cry out to her, "Home, wretched creature, home at once. What are you doing here? Don't you know that at this moment your lover, he whom you have ruined, is suspected of an assassination? Home, then, that I may question you, that I may learn from you whether he is innocent or guilty. For you will tell me, without knowing it. Ah! I have prepared a fine trap for you. Go home, then, this anxiety is killing me." She returned to her carriage. It started off once more, passed up the Rue de Faubourg Montmartre, turned into the Rue de Provence, deposited its fair freight at her own door, and drove away. "She lives here," said old Tabret, with a sigh of relief. He got out of the cab, gave the driver his 40 francs, bade him wait, and followed in the young woman's footsteps. "The old fellow is patient," thought the driver, and the little brunette is caught. The detective opened the door of the concierge's lodge. "What is the name of the lady who just came in?" he demanded. The concierge did not seem disposed to reply. "Her name," insisted the old man. The tone was so sharp, so imperative, that the concierge was upset. "Madame Juliette Chaffour," he answered. "On what floor does she reside?" "On the second, the door opposite the stairs." A minute later, the old man was waiting in Madame Juliette's drawing room. Madame was dressing, the maid informed him, and would be down directly. Tabaret was astonished at the luxury of the room. There was nothing flaring or coarse, or in bad taste. It was not at all like the apartment of a kept woman. The old fellow, who knew a good deal about such things, saw that everything was of great value. The ornaments on the mantelpiece alone must have cost, at the lowest estimate, 20,000 francs. Clerget, thought he, didn't exaggerate a bit. Juliette's entrance disturbed his reflections. She had taken off her dress, and had hastily thrown about her a loose black dressing gown, trimmed with cherry-colored satin. Her beautiful hair, slightly disordered after her drive, fell in cascades about her neck, and curled behind her delicate ears. She dazzled old Tabaret. He began to understand. "You wished, sir, to speak with me?" she inquired, bowing gracefully. "Madam," replied M. Tabaret, "I am a friend of Noël Gerdy's, I may say his best friend, N." "Pray sit down, sir," interrupted the young woman. She placed herself on a sofa, just showing the tips of her little feet encased in slippers matching her dressing gown, while the old man sat down in a chair. "I come, madam," he resumed, "on very serious business. Your presence at M. Gerdy's." "Ah," cried Juliette, "he already knows of my visit? Then he must employ a detective." "My dear child," began Tabaret, paternally. "Oh. I know, sir, what your errand is. Noël has sent you here to scold me. He forbade my going to his house, but I couldn't help it. It's annoying to have a puzzle for a lover, a man whom one knows nothing whatever about, a riddle in a black coat and a white cravat, a sad and mysterious being. You have been imprudent." "Why?" "Because he is going to get married." "Why does he not admit it then?" "Suppose that it is not true." "Oh, but it is. He told that old shark Clerget so, who repeated it to me. Anyway, he must be plotting something in that head of his. For the last month he has been so peculiar, he has changed so, that I hardly recognize him." Old Tabaret was especially anxious to know whether Noël had prepared an alibi for the evening of the crime. For him that was the grand question. If he had, he was certainly guilty. If not, he might still be innocent. Madame Juliette, he had no doubt, could enlighten him on that point. Consequently he had presented himself with his lesson all prepared, his little trap all set. The young woman's outburst disconcerted him a little, but trusting to the chances of conversation, he resumed. "Will you oppose Noël's marriage, then?" "His marriage?" cried Juliette, bursting out into a laugh. "Ah, the poor boy. If he meets no worse obstacle than myself, his path will be smooth. Let him marry by all means, the sooner the better, and let me hear no more of him." "You don't love him, then?" asked the old fellow, surprised at this amiable frankness. "Listen, sir. I have loved him a great deal, but everything has an end. For 4 years, I, who am so fond of pleasure, have passed an intolerable existence. If Noël doesn't leave me, I shall be obliged to leave him. I am tired of having a lover who is ashamed of me and who despises me. If he despises you, my pretty lady, he scarcely shows it here," replied old Tabaret, casting a significant glance about the room. "You mean," said she rising, "that he spends a great deal of money on me." "It's true. He pretends that he has ruined himself on my account. It's very possible. But what's that to me? I am not a grabbing woman, and I would much have preferred less money and more regard. My extravagance has been inspired by anger and want of occupation. Gerdy treats me like a mercenary woman. And so I act like one. We are quits. You know very well that he worships you. I tell you he is ashamed of me. He hides me as though I were some horrible disease. You are the first of his friends to whom I have ever spoken. Ask him how often he takes me out. One would think that my presence dishonored him. Why, no longer ago than last Tuesday, we went to the theater. He hired an entire box. But do you think that he sat in it with me? Not at all. He slipped away and I saw no more of him the whole evening. How so? Were you obliged to return home alone? No. At the end of the play, towards midnight, he deigned to reappear. We had arranged to go to the masked ball at the opera and then to have some supper. Ah, it was amusing. At the ball, he didn't dare to let down his hood, or take off his mask. At supper, I had to treat him like a perfect stranger, because some of his friends were present. This, then, was the alibi prepared in case of trouble. Juliet, had she been less carried away by her own feelings, would have noticed old Tabret's emotion, and would certainly have held her tongue. He was perfectly livid, and trembled like a leaf. Well, he said, making a great effort to utter the words, the supper, I suppose, was none the less gay for that. Gay, echoed the young woman, shrugging her shoulders. You do not seem to know much of your friend. If you ever ask him to dinner, take good care not to give him anything to drink. Wine makes him as merry as a funeral procession. At the second bottle, he was more tipsy than a cork. So much so, that he lost nearly everything he had with him, his overcoat, purse, umbrella, cigar case. Old Tabret couldn't sit and listen any longer, he jumped to his feet like a raving madman. Miserable wretch, he cried, infamous scoundrel. It is he, but I have him. And he rushed out, leaving Juliet so terrified that she called her maid. Child, said she, I have just made some awful blunder, have let some secret out. I am sure that something dreadful is going to happen, I feel it. That old rogue was no friend of Noel's, he came to circumvent me, to lead me by the nose, and he succeeded. Without knowing it I must have spoken against Noel. What can I have said? I have thought carefully, and can remember nothing, but he must be warned though. I will write him a line, while you find a messenger to take it. Old Tabret was soon in his cab and hurrying towards the prefecture of police. Noel an assassin. His hate was without bounds, as formerly had been his confiding affection. He had been cruelly deceived, unworthily duped, by the vilest and the most criminal of men. He thirsted for vengeance, he asked himself what punishment would be great enough for the crime. For he not only assassinated Claudine, thought he, but he so arranged the whole thing as to have an innocent man accused and condemned. And who can say that he did not kill his poor mother? He regretted the abolition of torture, the refined cruelty of the Middle Ages, quartering, the stake, the wheel. The guillotine acts so quickly that the condemned man has scarcely time to feel the cold steel cutting through his muscles, it is nothing more than a fillip on the neck. Through trying so much to mitigate the pain of death, it has now become little more than a joke, and might be abolished altogether. The certainty of confounding Noel, of delivering him up to justice, of taking vengeance upon him, alone kept old Tabret up. It is clear, he murmured, that the wretch forgot his things at the railway station, in his haste to rejoin his mistress. Will they still be found there? If he has had the prudence to go boldly, and ask for them under a false name, I can see no further proofs against him. Madame Chaffort's evidence won't help me. The hussy, seeing her lover in danger, will deny what she has just told me, she will assert that Noel left her long after 10 o'clock. But I cannot think he has dared to go to the railway station again. About halfway down the Rue Richelieu, Tabret was seized with a sudden giddiness. I am going to have an attack, I fear, thought he. If I die, Noel will escape, and will be my heir. A man should always keep his will constantly with him, to be able to destroy it, if necessary. A few steps further on, he saw a doctor's plate on a door. He stopped the cab, and rushed into the house. He was so excited, so beside himself, his eyes had such a wild expression, that the doctor was almost afraid of his peculiar patient, who said to him hoarsely, "Bleed me." The doctor ventured an objection, but already the old fellow had taken off his coat, and drawn up one of his shirt sleeves. "Bleed me," he repeated. "Do you want me to die?" The doctor finally obeyed, and old Tabret came out quieted and relieved. An hour later, armed with the necessary power, and accompanied by a policeman, he proceeded to the Lost Property Office at the St. Lazare railway station, to make the necessary search. It resulted as he had expected. He learnt that, on the evening of Shrove Tuesday, there had been found in one of the second-class carriages, of train number 45, an overcoat and an umbrella. He was shown the articles, and he at once recognized them as belonging to Noël. In one of the pockets of the overcoat, he found a pair of lavender kid gloves, frayed and soiled, as well as a return ticket from Chatou, which had not been used. In hurrying on, in pursuit of the truth, old Tabret knew only too well what it was. His conviction, unwillingly formed when Clerget had told him of Noël's follies, had since been strengthened in a number of other ways. When with Juliet, he had felt positively sure, and yet, at this last moment, when doubt had become impossible, he was, on beholding the evidence arrayed against Noël, absolutely thunderstruck. "Onwards," he cried at last. "Now to arrest him." And, without losing an instant, he hastened to the Palais de Justice, where he hoped to find the investigating magistrate. Notwithstanding the lateness of the hour, M. Daburon was still in his office. He was conversing with the Count de Commarin, having related to him the facts revealed by Pierre Lerouge, whom the Count had believed dead many years before. Old Tabret entered like a whirlwind, too distracted to notice the presence of a stranger. "Sir," he cried, stuttering with suppressed rage, "we have discovered the real assassin. It is he, my adopted son, my heir, Noël." "Noël," repeated M. Daburon, rising. And then in a lower tone, he added, "I suspected it." "A warrant is necessary at once," continued the old fellow. "If we lose a minute, he will slip through our fingers. He will know that he is discovered, if his mistress has time to warn him of my visit. Hasten, sir, hasten." M. Daburon opened his lips to ask an explanation, but the old detective continued, "That is not all. An innocent man, Albert, is still in prison." "He will not be so an hour longer," replied the magistrate. "A moment before your arrival, I had made arrangements to have him released. We must now occupy ourselves with the other one." Neither old Tabret nor M. Daburon had noticed the disappearance of the Count de Commarin. On hearing Noël's name mentioned, he gained the door quietly, and rushed out into the passage. Chapter 19. Noël had promised to use every effort, to attempt even the impossible, to obtain Albert's release. He in fact did interview the public prosecutor and some members of the bar, but managed to be repulsed everywhere. At 4 o'clock, he called at the Count de Commarin's house, to inform his father of the ill success of his efforts. "The Count has gone out," said Denis. "But if you will take the trouble to wait." "I will wait," answered Noël. "Then," replied the valet, "will you please follow me? I have the Count's orders to show you into his private room." This confidence gave Noël an idea of his new power. He was at home, henceforth, in that magnificent house. He was the master, the heir. His glance, which wandered over the entire room, noticed the genealogical tree, hanging on the wall. He approached it, and read. It was like a page, and one of the most illustrious, taken from the Golden Book of French nobility. Every name which has a place in our history was there. The Commarins had mingled their blood with all the great families, 2 of them had even married daughters of royalty. A warm glow of pride filled the barrister's heart, his pulse beat quicker, he raised his head haughtily, as he murmured, "Viscount de Commarin." The door opened. He turned, and saw the Count entering. As Noël was about to bow respectfully, he was petrified by the look of hatred, anger, and contempt on his father's face. A shiver ran through his veins. His teeth chattered, he felt that he was lost. "Wretch!" cried the Count. And, dreading his own violence, the old nobleman threw his cane into a corner. He was unwilling to strike his son. He considered him unworthy of being struck by his hand. Then there was a moment of mortal silence, which seemed to both of them a century. At the same time their minds were filled with thoughts, which would require a volume to transcribe. Noël had the courage to speak first. "Sir," he began. "Silence!" exclaimed the Count hoarsely. "Be silent. Can it be, heaven forgive me, that you are my son? Alas, I cannot doubt it now. Wretch! You knew well that you were Madame Gerdy's son. Infamous villain! You not only committed this murder, but you did everything to cause an innocent man to be charged with your crime. Parricide! You have also killed your mother." The barrister attempted to stammer forth a protest. "You killed her," continued the Count with increased energy, "if not by poison, at least by your crime. I understand all now. She was not delirious this morning. But you know as well as I do what she was saying. You were listening, and, if you dared to enter at that moment when one word more would have betrayed you, it was because you had calculated the effect of your presence. It was to you that she addressed her last word, assassin." Little by little, Noël had retired to the end of the room, and he stood leaning against the wall, his head thrown back, his hair on end, his look haggard. A convulsive trembling shook his frame. His face betrayed a terror most horrible to see, the terror of the criminal found out. "I know all, you see," continued the Count, "and I am not alone in my knowledge. At this moment, a warrant of arrest is issued against you." A cry of rage like a hollow rattle burst from the barrister's breast. His lips, which were hanging through terror, now grew firm. Overwhelmed in the very midst of his triumph, he struggled against this fright. He drew himself up with a look of defiance. M. de Commarin, without seeming to pay any attention to Noël, approached his writing table, and opened a drawer. "My duty," said he, "would be to leave you to the executioner who awaits you. But I remember that I have the misfortune to be your father. Sit down, write and sign a confession of your crime. You will then find firearms in this drawer. May heaven forgive you." The old nobleman moved towards the door. Noël with a sign stopped him, and drawing at the same time a revolver from his pocket, he said, "Your firearms are needless, sir. My precautions, as you see, are already taken, they will never catch me alive." Only, repeated the Count harshly. "I must tell you, sir," continued the barrister coldly, "that I do not choose to kill myself, at least, not at present." "Ah," cried M. de Commarin in disgust, "you are a coward." "No, sir, not a coward, but I will not kill myself until I am sure that every opening is closed against me, that I cannot save myself." "Miserable wretch!" said the Count, threateningly, "must I then do it myself?" He moved towards the drawer, but Noël closed it with a kick. "Listen to me, sir," said he, in that hoarse, quick tone, which men use in moments of imminent danger. "Do not let us waste in vain words the few moments respite left me. I have committed a crime, it is true, and I do not attempt to justify it, but who laid the foundation of it, if not yourself? Now, you do me the favor of offering me a pistol. Thanks. I must decline it. This generosity is not through any regard for me. You only wish to avoid the scandal of my trial, and the disgrace which cannot fail to reflect upon your name." The Count was about to reply. "Permit me," interrupted Noël imperiously. "I do not choose to kill myself, I wish to save my life, if possible. Supply me with the means of escape. And I promise you that I will sooner die than be captured. I say, supply me with means, for I have not 20 francs in the world. My last 1,000-franc note was nearly all gone the day when, you understand me. There isn't sufficient money at home to give my mother a decent burial. Therefore, I say, give me some money. Never. Then I will deliver myself up to justice, and you will see what will happen to the name you hold so dear. The Count, mad with rage, rushed to his table for a pistol. Noël placed himself before him. Oh, do not let us have any struggle, said he coldly, I am the strongest. Comte de Commarin recoiled. By thus speaking of the trial, of the scandal and of the disgrace, the barrister had made an impression upon him. For a moment hesitating between love for his name and his burning desire to see this wretch punished, the old nobleman stood undecided. Finally his feeling for his rank triumphed. Let us end this, he said in a tremulous voice, filled with the utmost contempt, let us end this disgraceful scene. What do you demand of me? I have already told you, money, all that you have here. But make up your mind quickly. On the previous Saturday the Count had withdrawn from his bankers the sum he had destined for fitting up the apartments of him whom he thought was his legitimate child. I have 80,000 francs here, he replied. That's very little, said the barrister, but give them to me. I will tell you though that I had counted on you for 500,000 francs. If I succeed in escaping my pursuers, you must hold at my disposal the balance, 420,000 francs. Will you pledge yourself to give them to me at the first demand? I will find some means of sending for them, without any risk to myself. At that price, you need never fear hearing of me again. By way of reply, the Count opened a little iron chest embedded in the wall, and took out a roll of bank notes, which he threw at Noël's feet. An angry look flashed in the barrister's eyes, as he took one step towards his father. Oh! Take care, he said threateningly, people who, like me, have nothing to lose are dangerous. I can yet give myself up, and, he stooped down, however, and picked up the notes. Will you give me your word, he continued, to let me have the rest whenever I ask for them? Yes. Then I am going. Do not fear, I will be faithful to our compact, they shall not take me alive. Adieu, my father. In all this you are the true criminal, but you alone will go unpunished. Ah, heaven is not just. I curse you. When, an hour later, the servants entered the Count's room, they found him stretched on the floor with his face against the carpet, and showing scarcely a sign of life. On leaving the Commarin house, Noël staggered up the Rue de l'Université. It seemed to him that the pavement oscillated beneath his feet, and that everything about him was turning round. His mouth was parched, his eyes were burning, and every now and then a sudden fit of sickness overcame him. But, at the same time, strange to relate, he felt an incredible relief, almost delight. It was ended then, all was over, the game was lost. No more anguish now, no more useless fright and foolish terrors, no more dissembling, no more struggles. Henceforth he had nothing more to fear. His horrible part being played to the bitter end, he could now lay aside his mask and breathe freely. An irresistible weariness succeeded the desperate energy which, in the presence of the Count, had sustained his impudent arrogance. All the springs of his organization, stretched for more than a week past far beyond their ordinary limits, now relaxed and gave way. The fever which for the last few days had kept him up failed him now, and, with the weariness, he felt an imperative need of rest. He experienced a great void, an utter indifference for everything. His insensibility bore a striking resemblance to that felt by persons afflicted with seasickness, who care for nothing, whom no sensations are capable of moving, who have neither strength nor courage to think, and who could not be aroused from their lethargy by the presence of any great danger, not even of death itself. Had anyone come to him then he would never have thought of resisting, nor of defending himself, he would not have taken a step to hide himself, to fly, to save his head. For a moment he had serious thoughts of giving himself up, in order to secure peace, to gain quiet, to free himself from the anxiety about his safety. But he struggled against this dull stupor, and at last the reaction came, shaking off this weakness of mind and body. The consciousness of his position, and of his danger, returned to him. He foresaw, with horror, the scaffold, as one sees the depth of the abyss by the lightning flashes. I must save my life, he thought, but how? That mortal terror which deprives the assassin of even ordinary common sense seized him. He looked eagerly about him, and thought he noticed 3 or 4 passers-by look at him curiously. His terror increased. He began running in the direction of the Latin Quarter without purpose, without aim, running for the sake of running, to get away, like crime, as represented in paintings. Fleeing under the lashes of the Furies. He very soon stopped, however, for it occurred to him that this extraordinary behavior would attract attention. It seemed to him that everything in him betokened the murderer. He thought he read contempt and horror upon every face, and suspicion in every eye. He walked along, instinctively repeating to himself, I must do something. But he was so agitated that he was incapable of thinking or of planning anything. When he still hesitated to commit the crime, he had said to himself, I may be discovered. And with that possibility in view, he had perfected a plan which should put him beyond all fear of pursuit. He would do this and that. He would have recourse to this ruse, he would take that precaution. Useless forethought. Now, nothing he had imagined seemed feasible. The police were seeking him, and he could think of no place in the whole world where he would feel perfectly safe. He was near the Odeon Theatre, when a thought quicker than a flash of lightning lit up the darkness of his brain. It occurred to him that as the police were doubtless already in pursuit of him, his description would soon be known to everyone. His white cravat and well-trimmed whiskers would betray him as surely as though he carried a placard stating who he was. Seeing a barber's shop, he hurried to the door, but, when on the point of turning the handle, he grew frightened. The barber might think it strange that he wanted his whiskers shaved off, and supposing he should question him. He passed on. He soon saw another barber's shop, but the same fears as before again prevented his entering. Gradually night had fallen, and, with the darkness, Noel seemed to recover his confidence and boldness. After this great shipwreck in port, hope rose to the surface. Why should he not save himself? There had been many just such cases. He could go to a foreign country, change his name, begin his life over again, become a new man entirely. He had money, and that was the main thing. And, besides, as soon as his 80,000 francs were spent, he had the certainty of receiving, on his first request, 5 or 6 times as much more. He was already thinking of the disguise he should assume, and of the frontier to which he should proceed, when the recollection of Juliet pierced his heart like a red-hot iron. Was he going to leave without her, going away with the certainty of never seeing her again? What? He would fly, pursued by all the police of the civilized world, tracked like a wild beast, and she would remain peaceably in Paris? Was it possible? For whom then had he committed this crime? For her. Who would have reaped the benefits of it? She. Was it not just, then, that she should bear her share of the punishment? She does not love me, thought the barrister bitterly, she never loved me. She would be delighted to be forever free of me. She will not regret me, for I am no longer necessary to her. An empty coffer is a useless piece of furniture. Juliet is prudent, she has managed to save a nice little fortune. Grown rich at my expense, she will take some other lover. She will forget me, she will live happily, while I was about to go away without her. The voice of prudence cried out to him, unhappy man. To drag a woman along with you, and a pretty woman too, is but to stupidly attract attention upon you, to render flight impossible, to give yourself up like a fool. What of that? Replied passion. We will be saved or we will perish together. If she does not love me, I love her, I must have her. She will come, otherwise. But how to see Juliet, to speak with her, to persuade her? To go to her house, was a great risk for him to run. The police were perhaps there already. No, thought Noël, no one knows that she is my mistress. It will not be found out for 2 or 3 days and, besides, it would be more dangerous still to write. He took a cab not far from the Carrefour de l'Observatoire, and in a low tone told the driver the number of the house in the Rue de Provence, which had proved so fatal to him. Stretched on the cushions of the cab, lulled by its monotonous jolts, Noël gave no thought to the future. He did not even think over what he should say to Juliet. No. He passed involuntarily in review the events which had brought on and hastened the catastrophe, like a man on the point of death, reviews the tragedy or the comedy of his life. Just 1 month before, ruined, at the end of his expedients and absolutely without resources, he had determined, cost what it might, to procure money, so as to be able to continue to keep Madame Juliet, when chance placed in his hands Count de Commarin's correspondence. Not only the letters read to old Tabret, and shown to Albert, but also those, which, written by the Count when he believed the substitution an accomplished fact, plainly established it. The reading of these gave him an hour of mad delight. He believed himself the legitimate son. But his mother soon undeceived him, told him the truth, proved to him by several letters she had received from Widow Lerouge, called on Claudine to bear witness to it, and demonstrated it to him by the scar he bore. But a falling man never selects the branch he tries to save himself by. Noël resolved to make use of the letters all the same. He attempted to induce his mother to leave the Count in his ignorance, so that he might thus blackmail him. But Madame Gerdy spurned the proposition with horror. Then the barrister made a confession of all his follies, laid bare his financial condition, showed himself in his true light, sunk in debt, and he finally begged his mother to have recourse to M. de Commarin. This also she refused, and prayers and threats availed nothing against her resolution. For a fortnight, there was a terrible struggle between mother and son, in which the barrister was conquered. It was then that the idea of murdering Claudine occurred to him. The unhappy woman had not been more frank with Madame Gerdy than with others, so that Noël really thought her a widow. Therefore, her testimony suppressed, who else stood in his way? Madame Gerdy, and perhaps the Count. He feared them but little. If Madame Gerdy spoke, he could always reply, "After stealing my name for your son, you will do everything in the world to enable him to keep it." But how to do away with Claudine without danger to himself? After long reflection, the barrister thought of a diabolical stratagem. He burnt all the Count's letters establishing the substitution, and he preserved only those which made it probable. These last he went and showed to Albert, feeling sure, that, should justice ever discover the reason of Claudine's death, it would naturally suspect he who appeared to have most interest in it. Not that he really wished Albert to be suspected of the crime, it was simply a precaution. He thought that he could so arrange matters that the police would waste their time in the pursuit of an imaginary criminal. Nor did he think of ousting the Viscount de Commarin and putting himself in his place. His plan was simply this: the crime once committed, he would wait. Things would take their own course, there would be negotiations, and ultimately he would compromise the matter at the price of a fortune. He felt sure of his mother's silence, should she ever suspect him guilty of the assassination. His plan settled, he decided to strike the fatal blow on the Shrove Tuesday. To neglect no precaution, he, that very same evening, took Juliet to the theatre, and afterwards to the masked ball at the opera. In case things went against him, he thus secured an unanswerable alibi. The loss of his overcoat only troubled him for a moment. On reflection, he reassured himself, saying, "Pshaw! Who will ever know?" Everything had resulted in accordance with his calculations. It was, in his opinion, a matter of patience. But when Madame Gerdy read the account of the murder, the unhappy woman divined her son's work, and, in the first paroxysms of her grief, she declared that she would denounce him. He was terrified. A frightful delirium had taken possession of his mother. One word from her might destroy him. Putting a bold face on it, however, he acted at once and staked his all. To put the police on Albert's track was to guarantee his own safety, to ensure to himself, in the event of a probable success, Count de Commarin's name and fortune. Circumstances, as well as his own terror, increased his boldness and his ingenuity. Old Tabret's visit occurred just at the right moment. Noël knew of his connection with the police, and guessed that the old fellow would make a most valuable confidant. So long as Madame Gerdy lived, Noël trembled. In her delirium she might betray him at any moment. But when she had breathed her last, he believed himself safe. He thought it all over, he could see no further obstacle in his way. He was sure he had triumphed. And now all was discovered, just as he was about to reach the goal of his ambition. But how? By whom? What fatality had resuscitated a secret which he had believed buried with Madame Gerdy? But where is the use, when one is at the bottom of an abyss, of knowing which stone gave way, or of asking down what side one fell? The cab stopped in the Rue de Provence. Noël leaned out of the door, his eyes exploring the neighborhood and throwing a searching glance into the depths of the hall of the house. Seeing no one, he paid the fare through the front window, before getting out of the cab, and, crossing the pavement with a bound, he rushed upstairs. Charlotte, at sight of him, gave a shout of joy. "At last it is you, sir," she cried. "Ah, madame has been expecting you with the greatest impatience. She has been very anxious. Juliet expecting him. Juliet anxious." The barrister did not stop to ask questions. On reaching this spot, he seemed suddenly to recover all his composure. He understood his imprudence. He knew the exact value of every minute he delayed here. "If anyone rings," said he to Charlotte, "don't open the door. No matter what may be said or done, don't open the door." On hearing Noël's voice, Juliet ran out to meet him. He pushed her gently into the salon, and followed, closing the door. There for the first time she saw his face. He was so changed. His look was so haggard that she could not keep from crying out, "What is the matter?" Noël made no reply. He advanced towards her and took her hand. "Juliet," he demanded in a hollow voice, fastening his flashing eyes upon her, "Juliet, be sincere, do you love me?" She guessed, she instinctively felt that something dreadful had occurred. She seemed to breathe an atmosphere of evil, but she, as usual, affected indifference. "You ill-natured fellow," she replied, pouting her lips most provokingly, "do you deserve—" "Oh, enough," broke in Noël, stamping his feet fiercely. "Answer me," he continued, bruising her pretty hands in his grasp, "yes, or no, do you love me?" 100 times had she played with her lover's anger, delighting to excite him into a fury, to enjoy the pleasure of appeasing him with a word, but she had never seen him like this before. She had wronged him greatly, and she dared not complain of this his first harshness. "Yes, I love you," she stammered, "do you not know it?" "Why do you ask me?" "Why?" replied the barrister, releasing her hands, "why?" "Because, if you love me you must prove it, if you love me, you must follow me at once, abandon everything. Come, fly with me. Time presses." The young girl was terrified. "Great heavens! What has happened?" "Nothing, except that I have loved you too much, Juliet. When I found I had no more money for your luxury, your caprices, I became wild. To procure money, I committed a crime, do you understand? They are pursuing me now. I must fly, will you follow me?" Juliet's eyes grew wide with astonishment, but she doubted Noël. "A crime? You?" she began. "Yes, me. Would you know the truth? I have committed murder, an assassination. But it was all for you." The barrister felt that Juliet would certainly recoil from him in horror. He expected that terror which a murderer inspires. He was resigned to it in advance. He thought that she would fly from him, perhaps there would be a scene. She might, who knows, have hysterics, might cry out, call for succor, for help, for aid. He was wrong. With a bound, Juliet flew to him, throwing herself upon him, her arms about his neck, and embraced him as she had never embraced him before. "Yes, I do love you," she cried. "Yes, you have committed a crime for my sake, because you loved me. You have a heart. I never really knew you before." It had cost him dear to inspire this passion in Madame Juliet. But Noël never thought of that. He experienced a moment of intense delight, nothing appeared hopeless to him now. But he had the presence of mind to free himself from her embrace. "Let us go," he said, "the one great danger is, that I do not know from whence the attack comes. How they have discovered the truth is still a mystery to me." Juliet remembered her alarming visitor of the afternoon, she understood it all. "Oh, what a wretched woman I am," she cried, wringing her hands in despair, "it is I who have betrayed you." "It occurred on Tuesday, did it not?" "Yes, Tuesday." "Ah, then I have told all, without a doubt, to your friend, the old man I supposed you had sent, Tabret. Has Tabret been here?" "Yes. Just a little while ago." "Come, then," cried Noël, quickly, "it's a miracle that he hasn't been back." He took her arm, to hurry her away, but she nimbly released herself. "Wait," said she. "I have some money, some jewels. I will take them." "It is useless. Leave everything behind." "I have a fortune, Juliet, let us fly." She had already opened her jewel box, and was throwing everything of value that she possessed pell-mell into a little traveling bag. "Ah, you are ruining me," cried Noël, "you are ruining me." He spoke thus, but his heart was overflowing with joy. What sublime devotion! "She loves me truly," he said to himself, "for my sake, she renounces her happy life without hesitation. For my sake, she sacrifices all." Juliet had finished her preparations, and was hastily tying on her bonnet, when the doorbell rang. "It is the police," cried Noël, becoming, if possible, even more livid. The young woman and her lover stood as immovable as two statues, with great drops of perspiration on their foreheads, their eyes dilated, and their ears listening intently. A second ring was heard, then a third. Charlotte appeared walking on tiptoe. "There are several," she whispered, "I heard them talking together." Grown tired of ringing, they knocked loudly on the door. The sound of a voice reached the drawing-room, and the word "law" was plainly heard. "No more hope," murmured Noël. "Don't despair," cried Juliet, "try the servants' staircase. You may be sure they have not forgotten it." Juliet went to see, and returned dejected and terrified. She had distinguished heavy footsteps on the landing, made by someone endeavoring to walk softly. "There must be some way of escape," she cried fiercely. "Yes," replied Noël, "one way. I have given my word. They are picking the lock. Fasten all the doors, and let them break them down, it will give me time." Juliet and Charlotte ran to carry out his directions. Then Noël, leaning against the mantel-piece, seized his revolver and pointed it at his breast. But Juliet, who had returned, perceiving the movement, threw herself upon her lover, but so violently that the revolver turned aside and went off. The shot took effect, the bullet entering Noël's stomach. He uttered a frightful cry. Juliet had made his death a terrible punishment, she had prolonged his agony. He staggered, but remained standing, supporting himself by the mantel-piece, while the blood flowed copiously from his wound. Juliet clung to him, trying to wrest the revolver from his grasp. "You shall not kill yourself," she cried, "I will not let you. You are mine, I love you. Let them come. What can they do to you? If they put you in prison, you can escape. I will help you, we will bribe the jailers. Ah, we will live so happily together, no matter where, far away in America where no one knows us." The outer door had yielded. The police were now picking the lock of the door of the antechamber. "Let me finish," murmured Noël, "they must not take me alive." And, with a supreme effort, triumphing over his dreadful agony, he released himself, and roughly pushed Juliet away. She fell down near the sofa. Then, he once more aimed his revolver at the place where he felt his heart beating, pulled the trigger and rolled to the floor. It was full time, for the police at that moment entered the room. Their first thought was, that before shooting himself, Noel had shot his mistress. They knew of cases where people had romantically desired to quit this world in company. And, moreover, had they not heard 2 reports? But Juliet was already on her feet again. "A doctor," she cried, "a doctor. He cannot be dead." One man ran out, while the others, under old Tabret's direction, raised the body, and carried it to Madame Juliet's bedroom where they laid it on the bed. "For his sake, I trust his wounds are mortal," murmured the old detective, whose anger left him at the sight. "After all, I loved him as though he were my own child, his name is still in my will." Old Tabret stopped. Noel just then uttered a groan, and opened his eyes. "You see that he will live," cried Juliet. The barrister shook his head feebly, and, for a moment, he tossed about painfully on the bed, passing his right hand first under his coat, and then under his pillow. He even succeeded in turning himself halfway towards the wall and then back again. Upon a sign, which was at once understood, someone placed another pillow under his head. Then in a broken, hissing voice, he uttered a few words. "I am the assassin," he said. "Write it down, I will sign it, it will please Albert. I owe him that at least." While they were writing, he drew Juliet's head close to his lips. "My fortune is beneath the pillow," he whispered. "I give it all to you." A flow of blood rose to his mouth. And they all thought him dead. But he still had strength enough to sign his confession, and to say jestingly to M. Tabret, my friend, so you go in for the detective business, do you? It must be great fun to trap one's friends in person." "I have had a fine game, but, with 3 women in the play, I was sure to lose." The death struggle commenced, and, when the doctor arrived, he could only announce the decease of M. Noel Gerdy, barrister. Chapter 20. Some months later, one evening, at old Mademoiselle de Goello's house, the Marchioness d'Arlange, looking 10 years younger than when we saw her last, was giving her dowager friends an account of the wedding of her granddaughter Claire, who had just married the Viscount Albert de Commarin. "The wedding," said she, "took place on our estate in Normandy, without any flourish of trumpets. My son-in-law wished it, for which I think he is greatly to blame. The scandal raised by the mistake of which he had been the victim, called for a brilliant wedding. That was my opinion, and I did not conceal it. But the boy is as stubborn as his father, which is saying a good deal. He persisted in his obstinacy. And my impudent granddaughter, obeying beforehand her future husband, also sided against me. It is, however, of no consequence. I defy anyone to find today a single individual with courage enough to confess that he ever for an instant doubted Albert's innocence. I have left the young people in all the bliss of the honeymoon, billing and cooing like a pair of turtle doves. It must be admitted that they have paid dearly for their happiness. May they be happy then, and may they have lots of children, for they will have no difficulty in bringing them up and in providing for them. I must tell you that, for the first time in his life, and probably for the last, the Count de Commarin has behaved like an angel. He has settled all his fortune on his son, absolutely all. He intends living alone on one of his estates. I am afraid the poor dear old man will not live long. I am not sure that he has entirely recovered from that last attack. Anyhow, my grandchild is settled, and grandly too. I know what it has cost me, and how economical I shall have to be. But I do not think much of those parents who hesitate at any pecuniary sacrifice when their children's happiness is at stake. The Marchioness forgot, however, to state that, a week before the wedding, Albert freed her from a very embarrassing position, and had discharged a considerable amount of her debts. Since then, she had not borrowed more than 9,000 francs of him. But she intends confessing to him some day how greatly she is annoyed by her upholsterer, by her dressmaker, by 3 linen drapers, and by 5 or 6 other tradesmen. Ah, well, she is all the same a worthy woman, she never says anything against her son-in-law. Retiring to his father's home in Poitou, after sending in his resignation, M. Daburon has at length found rest, forgetfulness will come later on. His friends do not yet despair of inducing him to marry. Madame Juliette is quite consoled for the loss of Noël. The 80,000 francs hidden by him under the pillow were not taken from her. They are nearly all gone now though. Before long the sale of a handsome suite of furniture will be announced. Old Tabret, alone, is indelibly impressed. After having believed in the infallibility of justice, he now sees everywhere nothing but judicial errors. The ex-amateur detective doubts the very existence of crime, and maintains that the evidence of one's senses proves nothing. He circulates petitions for the abolition of capital punishment, and has organized a society for the defense of poor and innocent prisoners.